Hey everybody, it's good to be with you again today. I had the best time recently appearing on a podcast called It's Just Dinner. The podcast is hosted by Dr. Tom Robinson and Bob Walz. They're both professors at Brigham Young University here in Provo, Utah, and they do a podcast that's all about dating and helping people get out on dates. And specifically, the topic of our podcast was how to overcome the common anxieties faced in dating. I'm going to share with you some behind-the-scenes footage of that podcast, and you'll be able to watch and view and listen to the whole discussion that we had. It was a great time, and I'm really grateful that they had me on the show. So stay tuned and enjoy the podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the It's Just Dinner podcast. I'm your host, Tom Robinson. And sitting right across from me, like always, is my co-host, Bob Walz.
Tom. It's great to be here again. Another day, another edition
another
of the
podcast.
It's Just Dinner. It's wonderful. Isn't life great?
Life is great. And we have a sub for Lauren today.
Yes.
That's Blake. Welcome,
yes,
Blake.
Welcome, Blake. Glad to have you here.
Blake
Did you say that Lauren's out on a date?
I think she is on a date tonight.
Well, she's not. Let's pretend she is.
Time will tell.
She's out having dinner.
We will just tell everyone she's on a date.
We'll just tell everyone she's just out having just dinner.
And just talking, getting to know someone.
Oh, that's so delightful to think of that in our heads, isn't it?
I mean, in those circumstances, I'm happy to substitute.
Well, that's right. So glad to have you.
Always helpful. Hey, today we have, I guess we're going to get a little more serious today. Are you ready for this?
That's why I wear a suit coat.
So we have someone really interesting today.
So
we have an adult.
We have
in the room
somebody
with
who's
us.
a smart person who actually
knows
what they're talking about.
That knows what he's talking about.
Oh, that's going to ruin our podcast.
This is Nevin Alderman.
Nevin?
Hello.
Welcome.
And Nevin is a licensed clinical mental health counselor.
Oh, wow.
He is get this, he's the owner and director of Renew Relationship Counseling.
Wow.
And
I like the sound of all
those
words.
And he says he's a relationship expert. So we're
Really?
about to find out. Welcome, Nevin.
To be determined.
So he's going to tell us to shut down this podcast, isn't he?
It's like, actually, I'm here on an intervention.
Yeah, he is. He's going to say, just stop. Just stop doing it.
Just stop doing what you're
Back
doing.
away from the podcast, and no one will get hurt.
So we invited Nevin because we thought it would be interesting to hear from an actual relationship expert and a therapist about this thing called relationships that these kids are getting into, and maybe give us some advice on maybe give them some advice.
We don't need advice. We already have a relationship.
On what to do and what not to do.
Well, so you know, I think if you understand a little bit about our podcast, the reason we got into this is because we've noticed that over the years it seems to become increasingly difficult for young single adults within our church community, and our research shows in the nation community, to develop relationships.
Yeah.
And we have certain reasons why we think this has happened, but we're interested to hear someone who actually is smart, who's not just making this stuff
up. Who's been doing this for a while.
And so do you see this same thing in your professional sense? Do you see that it's more difficult now for people to develop relationships, or is that just our supposition?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, difficult to develop them and difficult to know how to enrich them, how to deepen them.
Oh,
right?
yeah, that's the next level, isn't it?
Because we're still pretty good at like interacting with one another, but a face-to-face, non-digital format is getting a little bit harder for us.
Getting a little more difficult.
So absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
Now, why do you think that is?
I think we've expanded so much in our ability to kind of connect people, which is fabulous, right? Like, we've never been able to exchange information and communicate with individuals with the ease that we can in our world today. But the format for that communication has been so impersonal for so long that I think those personal skills that are required really for dating and courting and developing a relationship just aren't being practiced as much as they used to be, right? So it's a lot easier to text. It's a lot easier to send a Snapchat or
and safer.
Yeah,
I mean, they feel less vulnerability. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
but less personal, less connecting.
Yes, right. Yeah, less personal. So in fact, there's something really freeing about being able to maintain the anonymity of being online and sharing opinions and sharing thoughts, but having kind of no ownership behind those thoughts or feelings, right? It's very safe for individuals to do. And in that way, I think it makes getting out and doing face-to-face connections more and more intimidating for individuals over time, right?
Interesting.
And so when it comes to getting together with another person and going out with each other, I mean, that can be horrifying.
A little terrifying.
Yeah.
We one time we did a research study at some point, and we found that fear of rejection was a major reason behind why young men didn't ask women on dates.
Yeah.
And we were reflecting on that in, back when, pre-World War II, when we were
back when we were dating,
that there wasn't that fear. That was just part of the deal. You knew you were going to get rejected on sometimes, but you knew if you just kept trying, you would. Yeah. Someone would go out with you.
Right?
That's right.
The odds say that maybe somebody will say yes.
Yeah.
Something will hit.
Something will connect. And for some reason, the fear of that has increased dramatically. And maybe it's because, like what you say, because their practice of doing this, that it's when you don't do it, it does things that you don't do become more fearful.
Absolutely. Yep. The more you avoid it. In fact, when you study anxiety and you look at anxiety, the more you avoid a thing, the more you feed the cognitive perception that the thing is scary.
Right.
Right.
Oh, that's true.
Because the behavior of avoidance is confirming the thought of fear.
Interesting.
Right? So the more you avoid, the more intimidating it becomes. And if somebody's done that for years and years, I mean, we were talking right before, and Tom was sharing with me about several individuals that he would encounter that are in their mid-20s and maybe haven't gone on a date ever.
Yeah. Right. Never been on a date.
Right? Which is 20 years then worth of avoiding a thing that allows anxiety to build that thing.
Wow.
What's interesting, it's a really interesting idea, that you and I have talked about, how our parents and others have told them not to date.
Right.
And
so it's actually prescribed avoidance.
Yeah.
Where your parents are telling you, no, avoid that, avoid that, which increases the anxiety when you get to the point where you can no longer avoid.
You come to BYU and you're cut free.
Right.
And then you're so anxious about it, and there's so many, personal, things inside going on that you can't really get past that.
So they don't date for the same reason I don't go to the gym anymore. Because the thought of going to the gym is actually worse than going to the gym.
I mean, the spandex can be pretty intimidating.
Yeah, but so you think, okay, I'm not going to go, and you do that for long enough, and then when you finally do go, you're terrified.
Yeah.
Because you think,
but then you go, and then you feel a lot better, and it gets easier and easier.
Then
you
get a habit. Once you do it, you get in the habit, and that's really what we're trying to promote here, is to undo that negative training of avoidance.
Yep.
That makes us sound so smart.
It does.
Yeah. When he says,
"You guys are brilliant,"
we sound so smart.
He confirmed everything we believe.
Yes, I love that. I love this guy.
Validating already. Right?
I love this guy.
And then it's just the gym. So
It's just the gym. It's just the gym.
Oh, that makes me feel so much better about myself. And so, how do you, when you encounter people who have that kind of avoidance training in their life, or that avoidance fear, what do you tell them to help them overcome that fear?
One of the you actually brilliantly already kind of hit on it a little
Congratulations.
bit.
Thank you very much.
As with any anxiety, the more you encounter it, the less intimidating it becomes, because the behavior of approaching it suggests that it's not so scary. And so over time, you can actually train yourself to not be so fearful of the thing, especially as your skills increase with that thing, right? Your confidence increases with that thing. It becomes less and less intimidating over time. But one of the critical things that we're trying to teach people at the very beginning of that process is that the anxiety or the vulnerability or the fear of rejection, whatever it may be, that you're feeling today won't be the same level of emotion that you're going to feel 3 weeks from now, 6 weeks from now,
true.
9 weeks from now, right? But people just assume that thing is super intimidating to me. So if it's on a 90% intimidation level today, it's going to be 90% 6 weeks from now, right? So when you talk to them about, like, hey, it's just dinner, go out and interact with some individuals, they're thinking in their mind, oh, that's so hard for me to do. And it's always going to be that level of difficulty for me, right? They don't realize that the more they do it, the less difficult it's going to be. Wow. And that they can actually work themselves into a place where they're actually quite comfortable with that thing.
That's really...
Right? That's mind-blowing for most people.
That's really scary.
They can't even imagine it, right? So because they just assume it's always going to be the same level of taxing on me emotionally as it is today, they say, never mind, I don't need to go on a date. It's that bad.
Right.
Like,
and that's kind of what we've been talking about for so long, is that kind of cut the dating thing out of it and just go to dinner.
Yeah.
And just go to dinner again and again. And then all of a sudden then it's not so scary, and you could actually go on a date.
Right.
And you can go on a second date.
Yeah.
And so, it's really interesting to hear you say that.
And
you are making us look really smart.
Yes, so kind of the theory that we've kind of kicked around is that we say it's just dinner, but really it's just a conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I think that the most healthy thing that a young man who has had this avoidance therapy training can do is have a conversation with a girl he's not necessarily attracted to.
Absolutely.
Just to practice having a conversation.
Absolutely. Yep. And that's so critical for them to practice, right? And the ladies don't mind.
No, they don't.
No,
because they can practice listening.
That's right. They don't mind, right? Like
symbiotic relationship, right?
It is. It's so critical. And when you think that in the future, right, if my goal eventually is to find a life partner that I'm going to settle down with and spend my life with, that those skills in communicating that I'm going to develop early on as I just take people out to dinner, right, are going to serve that relationship later on in my life. Right. Because the more I practice that communication that you're talking about early on, the better those skills may be later on. Right. And so even if I realize that many of the people I go to dinner with, I might not propose to, right?
Hopefully
but
not.
What I've done is I've refined my skills with somebody that I'm not going to spend my life with, so that by the time I meet the person that I'm going to, I've got skills. I've got game. Right?
It Just Dinner is a skills-based program.
It's giving you game.
That's right.
Through the It's Just Dinner program, you will learn the basic skills of dating.
That's right.
Yeah. Now, what happens? We talked about anxiety, but I'm curious as to as it gets deeper, as this kind of avoidance of dating and avoidance of like interpersonal relationships, how deep does that go, and where does it get to like a danger point?
Yeah. Well, and here's the other thing that we haven't mentioned yet that I think is important as we're considering that. So we talked about social media and social connection, online connection, right? And the other thing that information exchange has done is it's allowed me to evaluate hundreds of thousands of men that I compare myself to.
Oh, that's true.
Right? And
didn't think about that side of it.
Right? And so as I'm on there and I'm looking at somebody who looks like they're successful in the dating world, I then have hundreds of thousands of individuals to compare myself to and to feel wanting, right? Like to say, I'm not as tall as that guy, I'm not as attractive as that guy, I'm not as good at sports as that guy, and they seem like they're getting people that are interested in them. I don't think anybody's going to be interested.
Why would I even try?
Which makes the vulnerability of putting myself out there even bigger, right? Because I've already convinced myself in looking at all these individuals, nobody's going to be interested in me,
right?
And so that's the other thing that's kind of feeding that anxiety, oftentimes that people aren't even aware of. It's just subconscious, right? As they browse, and then they get done browsing and saying, "That'll never be my life." Right? And
so true.
I'll never be able to be with a person like that, because they look at the person's with and say, that's not me.
Right.
So that's the other thing that's kind of feeding
that's true.
that anxiety.
Oh, interesting.
So then, go ahead.
So how do you undo that when someone is programmed that way? How do you convince them that the reality is otherwise?
Right. Yeah. And really, they're not going to find that that's true without stepping out there a few times
and trying it.
They really need
answers the same.
Yeah. They need to kind of get out there and realize, hey, like there's things that I bring to the table I may not even be aware of, and a lot of the people that I'm interacting with might not be interested in that, right? Like these things that I'm looking at online.
Right.
So it's actually quite surprising to people usually when they'll go out a few times and experience face-to-face interactions that maybe I'm more likable than I thought. Right? Like maybe I'm more interesting than I thought.
Or maybe I'm less likable than I thought.
That's mine, right?
Which
I think is the other beautiful thing that you guys are doing, though, right? Is you're taking the point of the podcast is you're taking kind of this pressure off of the idea that what I'm doing is calling somebody up and saying, hey, will you evaluate my value and my worth tonight? Right? By how the date goes? Like, will you, by the end of the date, will you let me know what I'm worth? Right? Like, and instead, it's
on a scale of 1 to 10.
Right? Like,
how would you rate my worth as a human being?
Right, exactly. But that's what it feels like.
Yes,
that really is.
It's so funny. But right? I was just being sarcastic, but that's actually true in reality of how people feel.
Yeah.
Because if you don't get that post-date text, that means you were a 3 or a 4.
Right.
You know,
which decreases the likelihood exactly. Yeah, you want to ask the next one, right?
I'm not doing this again.
It's like, how many people do I need to go out with to find out that I suck?
Right.
You know. So,
so the idea is that by disarming that, by only developing a friendship,
right,
and not looking for a love relationship, because it takes the pressure off of that scale.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking for a friendship, and if the friendship's going well, we might consider evolving it from there.
Right.
And that the fact that the friendship went well and I have a friend is going to increase my self-worth of my value.
Absolutely.
And so I'm not going to think, well, everyone thinks I'm odd or goofy.
Yeah.
You're going to think, well, I have girls who are friends, and if they like me, then there's a good chance that other girls will like me.
And those girls have friends.
Yes. So and they talk. They talk to each other.
You know? That's right.
But this is especially good for young men, for men to kind of consider as well, right, is that the average lady isn't going to know how interested she is until she has some time to get to know him. Right. She's looking for the emotional connection with him, right? Which doesn't typically come in a first meeting, right?
Right. And it shouldn't probably.
Yeah, right. So as a result of that, oftentimes ladies won't really know how interested they are until they've been out a few times with you, right? So if you try to, at the end of the day, right, determine how interested are you in me, right? Like I'm likely asking that question way too soon.
Right.
So it's helpful. It's helpful just to know that, right? Like that she's not likely going to make a real quick decision on whether she's interested or not. But sometimes his insecurity wants to know so bad, he starts pushing the question way earlier than she's ready to give the answer, and might kind of get rejection because of it, right?
So the answer to this is Qualtrics surveys.
There you go.
Up to the date.
Send out a survey.
A scale of 1 to 10, how would you?
On a slider, let me know. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it is one of these problems, like I mentioned, that it's like these boys and the girls kind of sink into this where they're hiding.
Yeah.
I mean, talk a little bit about the dangers that they really face if they don't push themselves out of that or get some help getting out of that.
And there is a lot of help.
I mean, serious depression that they...
Absolutely, yeah. Serious depression, that anxiety over time in the thing that I'm avoiding grows.
Right.
Right. So the longer that I avoid it, the harder it's going to be. Mm-hmm. Right. So there's just in time, there's that danger. But also there's danger that I'm going to talk myself out of my ability to connect with another person more and more over time. And people will actually give themselves fewer and fewer opportunities to really evaluate what people are responding to with themselves. And so we're making big, sweeping conclusions out of 1 or 2 rejections, right? When in reality, there's hundreds of thousands of individuals that I haven't ever even spoken to, right? And but I've decided because of 2 or 3 and how they went, right, that
I'm going to eliminate everyone else.
Yeah. So those things can become bigger and bigger dangers over time. The other one that becomes a bigger danger is that an individual gets more comfortable not connected.
Right. Oh, that's a real danger.
You find a safe space.
Yeah.
Right.
There. They figure out different ways to fill that void. Yeah. Right. And the better they get at filling the void, right, of not having a person in their life, the less they feel the need for one. Right. Which then just perpetuates this avoidance issue.
So the more they don't go out, the more comfortable they are with not going out, so they don't go out.
Yeah, typically they fill that with sports statistics, right? Or they'll fill that
video
with
games,
right? Sometimes things like pornography they'll fill that void with, right? Or work, right? They'll just throw themselves into work. So they kind of create a situation that they're more comfortable in the loneliness, to the point that the loneliness isn't pulling them toward meeting people anymore.
Wow.
And if the loneliness goes away, if it's not nagging at them, and they're intimidated by connecting with others, now they're in a real world.
Wow.
And sometimes those can be dysfunctional coping mechanisms that they identify. For example, pornography. Because if they use pornography to fill that void, now they're moving into a whole different area of dysfunction, because now they're viewing women not as friends to talk to, but as objects.
And unrealistic connections.
Unrealistic.
And the portrayals that are happening, right, aren't real life. Like they're not anything that they're going to duplicate in the real world. Not to mention the addictive
nature
cycle that can happen.
So it's like pouring gasoline on the problem.
It really is. But many people find it as a quick fix to loneliness.
Right. And removing the pain of rejection and the fear of rejection.
And thus reducing the need for connection.
So funny you say that, because I will ask kids, they'll say, well, I'm not dating. I say, well, why aren't you dating? Well, I've got too much work, or I'm doing too much homework, or I've got this project. And I always say, those are excuses.
Yeah.
That's all those are excuses.
Avoidance tactics.
Avoidance tactics is exactly what those are.
The one that we hear a lot is, well, I'm not looking for a wife yet.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's just an avoidance
I'm not ready
thing,
to get married.
I'm not ready to get married, so I'm not going to talk to any girls until... And that's scary for the girls, because when you're ready, look out, ladies, because he's coming with a loaded gun.
Your wife doesn't want to be the first person you've tried talking to, right?
No, obviously not. Now, I'd like your opinion on, we did some kind of anecdotal research a few years ago, and it would be interesting to get your take on this, where we did kind of focus groups with different people who were in one of the YSA stakes. And our question was to try to come to the point of what were the reasons that they were avoiding marriage. And the number one reason that we found in the focus groups was not what we thought, and it was fear of failure. That if the marriage wouldn't work out, that they wouldn't have enough money, that it would be difficult, that they would end up in divorce. And so they were avoiding marriage because their fear was that it was not going to be successful.
Yeah.
Do you see that in your practice, people?
Absolutely. And the thing that I'll add to that is that carries on into marriage too, because the next one that they're afraid of is getting help if things aren't going well.
Oh, right.
So they'll kind of treat therapy as like a last ditch effort.
Right.
If we've tried everything else and it seems like nothing's going to work, then maybe we'll try getting help. Right. Which it's not impossible at that point, but they've just bypassed so many opportunities to give their relationship a great chance at success, and allowed so many injuries to build up out of fear that therapy might mean we're in a really terrible spot that we don't want to look at.
So therapy becomes a fear and anxiety
by itself.
So I would rather just deal with the problem than try to get help, because I'm afraid of the stigma of, well, we're going to therapy.
Yep. Or even avoid how serious the problem's getting, kind of like avoiding dating in the first place, right?
So this avoidance continues on, the problem of avoidance. So the way we viewed it from an ecclesiastical point was the understanding of the nature of the fall. So that's very LDS, Christian-centric, that life is supposed to be hard.
Yeah.
And that's why we're here, and it's going to be tough, and you're going to have hard times, and everybody does.
Absolutely.
And, you're not going to get along, and you're not going to have this blissful relationship. Well, she never said a crossword a day in her life. And there might be people like that, but I don't know any, and it's certainly not me. And my wife was here; she would testify to that.
Maybe
I've met her.
Heatley's had something pretty special.
Well, and that's what everybody says. But I don't want to talk out of school here. But his granddaughters were my students. But let's just drop it there. But everybody has issues.
Yeah.
I don't care who they are.
Yeah.
Moses married an Ethiopian woman.
Yeah.
I mean, we just read that last week. And his sister and brother didn't like it.
Yeah.
God seemed to be okay. But there's issues with every relationship, whether it's a marital or non. And if you assume that it's going to be perfect, then you're going to be sorely disappointed.
Yeah, and put a ton of pressure on yourself to be perfect.
Yeah.
And then put a ton of pressure on your partner to be perfect, right?
So the second area that we found, and I'd like your opinion on this too, was people who we called it the perfection complex. Either they were looking for the perfect mate, or they believed they were the perfect mate. And so they didn't want to settle.
Yeah.
And so they were afraid that somebody would come along,
the grass is greener.
Yeah, there'd be somebody better. Yeah. This person is great, but there's probably somebody better.
Yeah.
I hear this a lot.
Yeah.
And talking to my students and talking to the YSAs, that they're afraid to get into a relationship because somebody better might come along.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I loved Dieter F. Uchtdorf's thoughts on that when he said, if you actually met that person, do you think they would really be that interested in you?
Right. I know. So
I can't remember which talk that was.
That's the hard rub on that thing. Is, well, you're not really so great at yourself, are you? And that's the truth, too, is that none of us are. We've all got flaws, and it just takes getting married to find those, but anytime you do, we all have certain areas that we can improve on, and that's part of life. And there is really no perfect person.
Yeah.
And so Do you see that a lot too in your
that
practice?
Perfectionistic mentality, and it really is one of the nice things about getting out and doing dinner or dating earlier on, right? Is I like to encourage people to approach from the angle of you're looking at a whole package, right? And there's going to be some wonderful, there's going to be some so-so, and there's going to be some hard with any person that you meet, right? So what you're trying to do then is introduce yourself to a lot of individuals and find out what are the hardest hards for you that maybe you want to be selective about in matching up with a partner. What are some of the so-sos that you can handle, that you can deal with, right? Because you've got them too, and you're going to ask them to deal with yours, right? And then what are the blissful? What are the things that really resonate with you the most? Those are some of the ones we're going to want to find in a partner. So that instead of looking for kind of the perfect match, the soulmate, the one person out of billions that's meant for me, right? Then I'm instead taking a look at it as from a menu mentality that says, what are these things that I know that work really well with me? That's what I'm looking for in a partner. And there's probably dozens of them out there, and I'll find them as I'm dating.
As I'm getting to know people.
Right. And then I can take from that and say, of all these people that I've had interactions with, there's something really special about you, right? And it's not perfection. That's not the special thing about you, right? There's something really special about you that makes me want to choose you and create love with you, choose love with you every day, despite the things that I know are going to be imperfections about me and you, right? Like,
interesting. The third area, the final area of our research that we found very interesting is that the very least concern of these focus groups we held of why they weren't getting married was the awkwardness of dating. Yet that's where we put all our chips in the YSA Stakes and Awards, is trying to have dances and trying to matchmake people, and because and they were saying, look, we don't need your help on this. So the awkwardness of dating was the least concern for them, and so it kind of shifted our direction from trying to be matchmakers and creating fun events to focusing more on what the church should do, and that's just teach you to come to Christ, and everything else will work out. And so I still think we're probably making that problem a lot, that we need to facilitate relationship development when it's just done naturally.
Yeah, especially if a person starts to, in and of themselves, feel a little bit more confidence with that number one area you were talking about, right? Like being able to look inward and feel a little less intimidated by the vulnerability of putting myself out there.
Well, we spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about dinner and dating, and I just wondered in the last couple of minutes, once these young adults get into a relationship, once they've been on several dates and they've had that discussion about where are we in the relationship and the DNR. Is that right?
Determining?
DTR. Sorry. See, that shows how little I know. I'm getting coached from over here. The DTR. Once you've had the DTR and you've developed a relationship, now where should they go from here? Like, what's some really healthy things to do to develop a really strong relationship?
Oh yeah, great question. I think spending time with one another is wonderful. But spending time getting to know each other is even better.
Okay.
Right? So a lot of times people will spend a lot of time with each other doing things like movies or eating or activities, sports, things like that. And I think it's also those are fantastic. It's not that we should avoid those, but intermingled into that, having conversations too about, hey, what are some of the neatest things that you've been through in life? What are some of the hardest things you've been through in life? What are some of your passions, or what are some of your fears, right? What do you look forward to in the future, right? Like having some of those conversations a little bit like 5 years from now, what do you want your life to look like, right? 10 years from now. Just getting to know each other on a little bit deeper level, because oftentimes in the beginning, we'll find somebody and we're so excited that they like us. And it makes us like them even more, right? Like, because I don't know about you, but the most likable people in my world are people that like
That's
me.
True.
Right?
That's true.
I like people who like me.
Right.
I think they're very smart.
That's why I like you, Bob.
Well, that's why I like you too, Tom.
So we get so excited about that sometimes, right, we're so excited about this connection that we finally have. People will even sometimes be afraid to ask some of the deeper questions because they don't want to give it a reason not to be compatible.
Not to work, right.
Oh,
that's
so
interesting.
they'll kind of avoid that until they've married their lives together. And then some of those things start to come out as they're building their life together, which is a hard time for them to come out if there's some real differences in some of those life visionary type
That's interesting
places.
to hear you say that, just keep the conversation going. and keep talking. And I really love hearing you say that. So
different than pulling out a list of questions and trying to sign somebody up for an MLM.
Right.
Like your recent podcast, right?
And that's how it feels sometimes. So now taking a step back and looking at the root cause of our problem here, at least within our culture, what advice would you give to parents? Because we've kind of traced this.
We think they're listening.
Well, no, the parents might not be listening, but the kids are going to give advice to their parents. They're going to say, "Well, mom and dad," or their younger brothers and sisters. Where Tom and I have actually taken responsibility here, and we have apologized to the youth of the church because we, as adult leaders and parents, we had the mission as the most important thing in life. And so anything that was going to be the slightest speed bump between toward missionary service, we said, just eliminate that.
To avoid that.
To avoid that. And so when they turned 12, we said, the girls over there, they're great, but just stay away from them. And when they turned 16, we said, well, you don't really even need to date at all because, then you'll have a girlfriend on your mission. And, it was not uncommon for stake presidents to require missionaries to go break up with their girlfriend before they could turn in their missionary papers. And so we did a lot, not the church, but the members, unintentionally to promote missionary service, which was good, but I think it came at a cost. And we didn't see that cost until later on, where we have a generation of young men who are afraid and are avoiding the relationship development because many of them have returned from their mission and never once had a conversation with a girl. Or a woman at this point.
To make it even worse is that, go on your mission, then when you come home, you'll go to BYU, and then you'll date all the time. And you'll get all the experience dating that you need here at BYU.
And I think we thought that because when we were at BYU, it was Datorama, and we didn't realize that was based upon our foundation that we had of relationship development.
Of dating before our missions.
We didn't realize that. It was our mistake, and we're sorry, and we apologize. So get off our back about it. We've already apologized. What advice would you have for parents? Because still we get this from parents who they say things like, well, the church says no dating before mission.
Or only group dating.
Or only group dating before mission. So as a trained expert, what advice would you give to parents who were worried about their children? There's fear of dating because it can lead to immorality and it can lead to a lot of things. So what advice would you give them?
And I think that's the biggest thing. I think you're nailing it, right? Like, let's talk about the problem and not make all of dating the problem, right? So I think the biggest advice to parents is let's talk about the immorality concern, right? And let's talk with the youth about here's where it becomes problematic. All of this part of it is so positive and so healthy and so good
and necessary,
but we're so sometimes hesitant to have that conversation that we just figure if we avoid the whole thing, then it can't be a problem, right? And so I think it's just being more assertive and proactive about the morality conversation, right? Let's have that conversation proactively and talk with the youth at the time about how they can confront that, how they can create healthy boundaries around that. And then we can be proactive about dating, encouraging dating without having to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Good point.
Because we're concerned about immorality, right?
Well, where was he 20 years ago?
Really?
He was probably in elementary school where he was, but we needed you 20 years ago when we were messing up the kids of the church.
It's very smart to have, or very good to have smart people
here.
It's really
occasionally we got to keep doing this.
And it's like every week we get someone smarter, and it's like making us look bad.
They're going to push us right out of this show. Our careers are over.
Well, this was really fun.
Yes, it was, and informative,
and very informative. Yes. And I hope that everyone takes an opportunity to even roll this back and listen to some of the stuff that Nevin has said, because it's so smart and so simple, right? I mean, it's just a matter of actually going out and having a conversation. I loved what you said earlier about how we can sink into this hole if we don't allow ourselves to experience some of these things and to kind of get out there and just try it once and then try it again and just kind of break through that barrier that's holding people back.
So I guess if we were going to summarize this, if you're a young man and the first thing you need to do is realize that if you're not dating, you have an avoidance problem. And it's not that you're just not dating. You're becoming comfortable in not dating, and that's dangerous. And you need to realize you have a problem. Mm-hmm. So if you're just saying, well, I would just rather not date, or I'm just going to hang out with my friends, or I'm not ready to date yet, those are all excuses to cover your avoidance fear.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Which is going to grow over time.
Right.
That fear.
It's not going to get better.
Right.
And so the only way to do that is to break out and do something that's hard.
Yeah.
And that is go out to dinner with somebody and
realize
just talk and realize it's going to get easier over time.
Yep.
The more you do it, the easier it's going to be.
Absolutely. And if that's so intimidating that I can't take that step, then at least start talking with somebody who can help you get there.
Good point.
Right? That sometimes people are already so intimidated that's just, it's so difficult for them to take that step. But we can get you help, right? Like
help is on the way.
It's there. Right. It's available
at the dinner table.
Well, thank you so much, Nevin. This has just been absolutely great. And again, this is Nevin Alderman. He's the owner and director of the Renew Relationship Counseling. Where are you guys located?
So we're in Springville and American Fork and online. So
So that's great. Okay. Well, if you find yourself in this kind of trap, reach out to someone and try to get some help. Hey, you guys, you can contact us at It's Just Dinner YSA at email or at gmail.com and send us your questions. We get a lot of funny date stories and first date stories, which are kind of fun.
We are not legally liable for messing your lives
up. No, we can't.
Even though
it's completely anonymous.
To sue us over this, and our legal counsel advises us that you can't do it.
And we do not use names. We fake the names, or the names have been changed to protect the innocent. But follow us on Instagram. We're at It's Just Dinner YSA, and we're also on TikTok, right? Hunter has been working really hard to put some really funny and really smart stuff up on TikTok.
We're hilarious
at It's Just Dinner. So thank you, Bob, for being here. Thank you, Nevin. This is great. Blake, thanks for filling in over there on the headquarters. And hey, you guys, keep listening and just go have fun out there, would you?
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the show. Comment below and share with us what principles applied to you the most, the ones that seem to resonate with you the most, that you've experienced in your own life. We'd love to hear about that. As always, thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to being with you again soon. Take care.